Hello,
Is this a webinar or a?
and welcome to the Business Revolution podcast and my third series, which is Changing Conversations. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Harry Derbitsky, who is president of the Advanced Coaching Training company and is a successful international 3P coach. And he has clients all over North and South America, Europe, and worldwide. And he's published a book recently, which is The Evolution of Addiction Recovery. And it is also co-host to the highly successful webinar and podcast series, Addiction, Alcoholism, and the Three Principles. But today we're really excited because he's going to be sharing with us how to experience stress-free and easy decision-making, which I know is going to be a really popular subject. So welcome, Harry, to the Business Revolution podcast. It's lovely to have you here today.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to see you and to be here as well.
Yeah. And what I was going to suggest, I'm just going to hand it over to you to open maybe on what you want to talk about. And so how do we make easy decision making? What do you feel lies behind that, just to kick it off?
Well, when I started in business, which was on Salt Spring Island, well, primarily on Salt Spring Island when I was studying with Sid, where he was teaching us to live in an ordinary way, which meant that I owned a couple of insurance agencies, which I bought with no money. And I wanted to talk about this because I observed how in the early stages of my development, how long decisions making took and how I felt about it. And the first inclination I had when I was starting an insurance agency that I had bought was decision making was confusing. And it caused me a lot of stress until I realized that I could be relaxed with this decision making and that I could make a mistake. Not all decisions were going to be correct. Not all decisions were perfectly done in a certain way. And that was part of the understanding of the responsibility of the decision making, was that I was going to be right, I was going to be wrong, and it was okay. And the moment it became okay, I became comfortable with decision making. And that freed me to make decisions much quicker, much more freely, much less fear-based, and as we talk in the 3P world, much less intellectual, which of course is something very important. Now, as I evolved as a human being and as a spiritual being in my understanding of what Sid was teaching, which primarily was in the early days truth inside yourself, accessing your own wisdom, but it was truth. It wasn't three principles, it was truth. And truth had a divinity to it, something that I could really appeal to. There was a degree of honesty with truth. Either I was in truth or I was in my ego. And so obviously when I was in truth, decision making was much easier. And when I was in ego, decision making was very, very complicated. But that wasn't the key point that I want to bring up, because that's obvious to everybody. Sometimes we're clear-headed, our minds are clear, and our decision making is easy, and sometimes we're not. So there's no revelation in what I just said. Everybody knows that. It's nothing earth-shattering or anything like that. But what I noticed as I grew as a human being and grew in my understanding of truth was that all of a sudden, at a certain stage when I broke through, when life started to provide me with the energy that I needed to live a magical life, all of a sudden, I realized that my decision-making, things that took 2 weeks, were happening in 3 seconds. What was those 2 weeks about, Andrea? What do you think?
Well, going on my experience, maybe you were like taking a straw poll of everybody around you, because I know that I've done that in the past before I came to this understanding. And I know I have clients as well who, you ask everybody who, whether what their opinion is, and then you think about their opinions, don't you? And then you make up some more ideas about it yourself, and you get lost in the what if.
Whether you ask other people or you just do a lot of research, there was a lot of process happening.
Yeah.
And that process happening is not what I'm suggesting will get you good results.
No.
I'm suggesting that's what will get you into war and famine and inequality and not caring about other people. That's the stuff that takes you away from the truth. The world is suggesting you should do a lot of that to make decisions. And I'm not against researching something that I don't know anything about. But I am very much against spending a lot of time in decision making, because what I found is the feeling will tell me whether it's right or wrong. And I have come to trust that because it's never fools me. So I check in, that feeling lets me know whether that's a good decision or a bad decision. That's it. I don't evaluate it. I don't spend time. I just trust that feeling. Now, if I have a feeling, let's say that's misinterpreted is wrong or bad or negative, and I follow it, it takes me to a crummy place. I feel uncomfortable. The results are ineffective, or, well, I know next time that feeling shows up, I'm not following it. So that frees you again. So there's no mistakes. But the process is much, much simpler. If you watch Sid Banks make decisions, and people were phoning him from all over the world and all this stuff, and it was effortless. And now sometimes he was confused, sometimes he was deceived, sometimes he had his own agenda that he thought was happening, and it was happening a different way. But primarily, it was just his feeling would tell him what. So if he met someone like you, Andrea, he probably would gravitate to you because he likes that spontaneity and that aliveness, and you might have all these things that you don't have together on the outside. He never looked at that. He never looked if you were poor or rich, or if you were in jail or a heroin addict or the richest person in the world. None of those were factors to why he would want to engage in an experience with you. And it's the same for me. All of a sudden, people say, oh, you must be so busy. Well, I'm not busy at all. I'm not busy at all. It's quite the opposite. I have lots of free time. And the reason is things that used to take 2 weeks to make decisions take 3 seconds. And the decisions are 1,000 times better.
Yeah. No, isn't that what everybody wants? How many people say, oh yeah, I don't have time. My head is so full. I don't have time for this. And actually it's because we're creating just so much extra thinking when we just don't need to. And it is as simple as that.
It is as simple as that, except you have to have an insight to see that. Yeah. So it's simple, and yet you can't see it until you see it. I read a book on why America attacked Iraq, and why Bush and the other guy, well, it was so complicated. After about 35 pages, they had gone through so much intellectual. Nobody could see clearly the common sense of the situation. So of course they fooled themselves. Of course they followed a lie. If you're going to be over wrapped up in an intellectual process, how can you hear your fellow employees? How can you how can you hear yourself? Isn't that the problem? Andrea wants to hear what she thinks. But the problem is, with all of that noise going around, she has no time for her in this delusion that she's living in. I'm using that as a metaphor, Andrea, not specific to you. She's living in. She's creating a lot of lies and noise, and she doesn't know which ones are true and which ones are untrue. Business people who make decisions based on money alone will have a tendency to be successful financially, but disastrous in human relations because they're not including a bigger picture. You see, so it's not just the feeling encompasses what a good result is, like I'm going to make another $1 million. That's not the purpose of the feeling. The purpose of the feeling is this is what's best for Andrea right now in the grand design of being a human being and a esoteric being.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted. I was not interested in being successful in business and fitting into society. It was boring. They were so dumb. They were like, the richer they were, the dumber they were. Like, they couldn't hear anything except their own ideas. Yet, in the reality of things, they were beautiful human beings who actually did want to help their fellow employees, but they got a little bit exasperated in trying to help because they themselves had not evolved enough as in a esoteric manner. So we need to understand that certain feelings are not always going to produce the grade A $1,000 million profit. They may produce the $1 million profit to you personally, so that your relationship with your wife is better, your relationship with your employees is better, your relationship with yourself, the key one, the big one, is better.
Yeah.
And decisions become easier when you realize that you are not in control. The purpose of our life is to learn we are not in control. Mm-hmm. We have understanding that gives us a broader and wiser perspective. But that understanding always comes up with Harry Derbitsky doesn't really know what's going to happen in the next second. I don't. I don't control my destiny in my world except to know that I do. Now, that doesn't make sense, but that's the way it works. Because I don't understand it either, Andrea, when I say something like that, because if I think about it, it's gone.
Yeah. It's so true. What came to my mind is I think that quite often we get caught up with the idea of what is going to happen. So we make a decision and, we might make that decision in a good place, and think, oh, I've got a really good feeling about this. This has to be the right decision. And then we create an idea about what's going to happen. Maybe it's like, my business is going to explode, or I'm going to go viral on YouTube, or whatever, imaginary thing that comes to mind. But then actually what happens is something that's very different.
It can be. We do have visions that come from within. Mm-hmm. And those are like prayers. Like you can pray and you can have a real prayer. And the same thing with visions. Now, what's unusual for me is that I was not only in business and now, working in addiction and other types, but people phone me for all types of stuff. But I also worked with the indigenous people on a big level. And it was good for me. Someone says, well, would you recommend I do it? No, I wouldn't recommend you do it at all. But it was, for me, it brought out a feeling. And one of the feelings was visions come from universal mind. And they are there as a gift. Some people dream, and they have dreams, and those dreams are important as a teaching tool. Visions. Now in sport, they talk about visions and stuff like, but I'm talking about bigger vision, the real vision, where you're given a glimpse of what's going to be happening in the other side. Women call that intuition.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it. In fact, I kind of like intuition better than intellect.
Yeah. Yeah. But for me, the way that I've seen it is that, like, we might have that intuition, and I don't know, sometimes it works out that way, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I often think that's almost like universal mind saying, come on, this is what could happen if you do this, so come on, let's do it, just to give me a push in the right direction. Now, if I get really hung up on it, that's when the wheels start falling off, because I think then I start creating a lot of thinking about it.
Well, you're learning, you're evolving. Yeah. You're learning to, like, the answer's always in silence. But as you notice, Andrea and Harry are not so silent.
I think it would be a very difficult podcast if we were.
Yeah, and so this, to learn to just trust or absorb, let it flow through without, when I talk about a feeling without any thinking, it's true. When I was your age, Andrea, I was thinking all the time, with the same stuff was happening.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't like now it's happening and then it wasn't. It was happening. It just I had images. And guess what? All of those images are nonsense.
Yeah.
Your image of who you are is so full of nonsense. It's incredible. You're so much more beautiful, so much more freer. What keeps you prisoner? Well, guess what? Those stories you're telling yourself. And those stories you're telling yourself is what we call addiction.
That's interesting. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's all the same thing. How to make a good decision is also the same way of how to live a clean life without addiction. It's the same basic thing. And the reason for that, Andrea, is that I love this quote from Sid in the Enlightened Gardener Revisited. He says, universal mind, universal thought, and universal consciousness they make psychology from a guesswork philosophy to a working science. Now, if they are indeed a working science, they will help you in every aspect of your life, from mental health, addiction, and decision making. And that's the reality of the situation. You can pretend you're the big kahuna, but we all know that's not true. When you pull down your pants, or whatever the image is, we all look the same. And so this working science allows us to get an understanding that as our level of consciousness rises, the ability to make clear decisions accelerate to make you a genius. So you evolve from a fool to a genius just with the level of consciousness rising. And some people, what they do is they get very clear in certain areas, and in those areas, they're very, very, very strong. That's spiritual wisdom. Well, of course, they call that material wealth, but it's they're very, very strong, and they're very clear, and they're very scientific. They have great confidence, and we all know confidence has a lot to play in this game called business. And so they're very, but anything outside of it, they're very weak. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you will not find your happiness and contentment in money. You will be happy you have the money, and it will give you an avenue of expression that makes things easier and certainly allows you to pay the bills and build a material dream world of yours for yourself. But we're talking about the whole package. A really complete, happy, content human being. Good father, good mother, or good husband. A person who cares about his clients, his customers, person who cares about his team, and who understands that it's a collective consciousness experience where universal mind is mentoring us, teaching us how to grow and be free of our contaminated, diluted thinking. And here's the joke. That contaminated, diluted thinking will never stop, but it stops having power over you. And the moment it stops having power over you, you understand about true freedom. If you want to make good decisions in business without any stress, do that. Go inside and be free. In freedom, you will find the greatest decisions in the world. I knew a guy who, when I was early in my career, I did a lot of business work, and he had a salary of, now this is 1970s or 80s. He had a salary of over $1 million. And no, not $1 million, a bonus of over $1 million. That's not his salary, just his bonus of $1 million. And I went to talk to him. Now listen to my insecurity, Andrea. At that moment when I was talking to him, I had zero money in my pocket. And I was listening to him, and I realized he had no insecurity about money. Like it wasn't the $1 million bonus. When he made a business decision, he didn't include money as part of the criteria. And I said to myself, I can't do that. I'm uptight about spending too much money on something. He would just buy it. So naturally, he bought this $5 million machine that took his fish business into another level. He didn't even bother. He didn't even think about the $5 million. He just made the decision. It was good business sense. Can you see the freedom of that?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose as a result of that, then his business grows and it does so much better, and yeah, a whole lot less stressful for him too.
Exactly. And not only that, because he made decisions not based on money, all his members of his team respected him a lot more.
Yeah.
They were all into that. They would say, oh, well, it's not just about money, it's about the right decision for the company. And that changes the ball game. That changes I'm not against making money. Everybody knows that it's nice to have that stuff. But if you're going to make that the key fundamental reason why you're making decisions, you're going to stifle yourself. And every time you stifle yourself or put fear into the picture, you're going to feel stress.
Yeah.
You can't.
It doesn't feel right, does it? It just doesn't sit right.
That's right, because there's something in you that isn't being allowed to express itself.
Yeah.
And one of the things you have to understand, you smart business people, is that a lot of the people who are addicted are a lot smarter than you are, more intelligent, more intuitive, more aware. But they couldn't conform to the nonsense you guys put out.
Mm.
If you're going to make people conform to a bad idea, certain people are going to have trouble accepting that. Not the sheep. No, they'll accept it for sure. And I'm talking people who are outliers, people who can really make great ideas to contribute to your business. So part of the understanding of making good decisions is you have to include people who don't always agree with you.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because how often if we made like an intellectual decision, oh, we kind of know probably it's not quite sitting right, but it makes sense. And often it does take that other person who's willing to pipe up or say something from a different point of view that really kind of shakes our own belief, doesn't it? You know, makes us revisit that decision.
That's right. And if everything is, if you have an open mind, you can see that it leads to more open decisions. If you have a closed mind, a definitive mind, you can see that there's no room outside of that.
Yeah.
And not everybody is in agreement with you. The sheep are, but the other people aren't.
Mm.
And you're not only interested in having people say yes to you, you're interested in what is the best possible outcome, and what is the common good. What is the common good for the whole company? After all, you don't want to just make money today and lose all your money tomorrow, which happens a lot in business, type of thing. The idea is, what is the short and long-term benefit to these decisions that we're making? Obviously, if you pollute the waters, it's really good for short-term profit. But as we start to see, you can only lie so much about the truth. And sooner or later, the consciousness of people become aware in certain areas that you're killing something very valuable, something that is alive right now. That is our oceans, alive, our land, alive, everything that we are around. And if you take that type of view, you'll care. You'll care. You'll have compassion. And as that compassion grows in you, the decisions become easier because you're not self-absorbed. What is ego? Self-absorbed. What is ego? Lying to yourself. What is ego? As Sid's definition, as an image of self-importance. Poor me or dig me, ego. Those things get in the way. And you know it. Everybody who's listening to this show know it. Your ego is the problem. Yet, once you know what ego is, you don't have to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
Because you just keep away from it.
Yeah.
Because it always leads you to the same thing: addictive behavioral patterns, greed, selfishness, anger, all those emotions that we hate.
Absolutely. We all experience them, don't we? Well, I wondered if you could maybe share a little bit more about, raising sort of levels of consciousness, because what I see a lot is, we'll know what the right decision is for us when we're in that kind of grounded place. We know what the right decision is. And then we kind of get sucked into our thinking and sucked into other people's thinking. And then that seems real, doesn't it? All these consequences and what if, and, different scenarios that we can make up. And I wondered if you could talk to that a little bit? I mean, does that go, or do you just experience it less, or do you just not take notice of it anymore? Just for those people who might be new to like the principles and not be quite as aware of what we're talking about.
Well, the problem, of course, with in the 3P community is that people do experience a raise in level of consciousness, and then they experience a dip down, and then they get exasperated, or they want another one, or they feel inadequate, so they take more courses, spend a lot of money on stuff that they don't need. So that's a normal question of how come I experience something, yet I am still bewildered by so many things in my life, and I feel lousy and all this stuff. I must have lost what I experienced and stuff like that. The first thing is, in a level of consciousness rising, doesn't mean you're enlightened. No offense, but I'm not enlightened. It's just a simple fact of life. The second thing is, Sid really emphasized being an ordinary human being. The trouble with people who experience a higher level of consciousness is they start to think they're special. You're about as special as every other person in the universe. That's how special you are. They are all special, including you, Andrea, very valuable. But we're all in the same boat. And let me give you an example of something, a horrible example of something in my life. The worst thing that ever happened to me was I got divorced after I had a huge spiritual experience. Now listen to this. How could someone who had such a large spiritual experience get divorced? It's an interesting question. And the answer was, you can use thought any way you want. Any way you want. And if you want to be stupid, go ahead. And that's what I did. And at a certain point, I got insecure about my life. I got insecure about this. And I started to, my thoughts got more and more confused. I assumed it would all just work out, but it didn't. It just got worse and worse. And then after my ex-wife, past wife asked me to leave, I realized I had an experience. Now this is like a spider web that covers the truth. And I had a tape recording going on. Andrea asked Harry, how's everything going? Fantastic. Everything is sensational. Da, 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 da. I had an answer for everything. All of it nonsense. None of it truthful. I had created a false image right across the board. And for 3 months, this tape recording was going on in my head. And then after 3 months, it stopped. And I says, oh, there I am. I'm never going to give myself up again. Too valuable, and so destructive, that other stuff. And so I woke up. But I still had to have an understanding that my spiritual insight was about oneness. I experienced 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of total silence in oneness. That's a powerful spiritual experience. And very similar to what Chip Chipman experienced, except his included thought and mine didn't. It was just the oneness. So I was still a loose psychological animal floating around with this spiritual love. This spiritual love saved me, by the way, Andrea. It saved me. So it wasn't like it was a wasted time, but I had to go through a tremendous amount of stuff up and down. Nobody made more mistakes than Harry Derbitsky. Nobody. But the answer was that the spiritual love that I had experienced through the insight saved me. It couldn't, I had no choice. It was the best feeling. All the rest of the stuff was lousy. And then I started to learn more about thought. And the beginning of it was I had a spiritual insight with, now I'm working as an executive director for an indigenous organization. I'm on Salt Spring. I visit Sid on Salt Spring Island. We go up to the top of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, the beautiful panoramic view, gorgeous day. Sid, Fergus, his dog who he loved, and me. And he says to me, okay, Harry, go ahead. Ask me anything you want. Well, of course, I was quite interested in that. And I wrote about this in my book. And I said, so I started asking him these spiritual questions because I wasn't interested in anything else. No, businessmen will ask a little bit different, but it's still the same thing. And while he answered every question in a very relaxed fashion, he always finished with, and it's all one. Here's the essence of your decision making. Everything you make is connected to the next moment. So don't pretend it's just a decision isolated. It affects the momentum or lack of momentum in your profit-making machine. It's a very important understanding that everything is interconnected. It's all one. And your decision affects the universal consciousness of the universe. So you can, of course, businessmen don't want to hear that. That's a little bit too deep for that, type of stuff. So I'm asking these questions, and he's asking, it's all one. And I'm going, gee, I never answered. Andrea asked me a question, I answer her question. I don't go, and it's all one. It's all interconnected. And while I asked the 10th question or so, I can't remember the question, I have an insight, but not an insight like normal, a visual insight. I see thought pop out of my mouth, go out into the abyss of the cliff, and pop back into me as a feeling. Well, at that point, I said, well, who's creating all my suffering? If my thought is going out and creating a feeling, and I have a feeling, what's creating that? And that was the beginning of me starting to get an understanding of higher and lower levels of consciousness. The right use of thought and the wrong use of thought.
Yeah.
Simple. Quiet down, guys. Don't be so noisy. Don't spend so much time trying to figure everything out and judging and analyzing, having big opinions. And just because you have money doesn't mean you're right. That doesn't mean anything. It just means you have money, period. And you might say, oh, I did it. Well, I got news for you. 98% of people who are successful say their success came from their failures.
Yeah.
I failed, I learned, I grew.
Yeah.
Guess what? Nothing has changed. Same thing. You have to grow. You have to keep growing. And as you grow, the decision making gets easier, clearer, freer. The level of consciousness naturally rises. Basically, another word for level of consciousness rising, you're more aware or understand more. You're never going to control it, Andrea. You can't. That's not your job. Your job is to accept the beauty that the universal mind is pouring out to you. And your consciousness of that is either it is or it isn't. If it's in your head, it's ego. If it's outside of your head, but in your heart, it's truth. Truth will set you free. Everybody here, the truth will set you free. Addiction, the truth will set you free. Forget about all that nonsense they're putting out. It's nonsense, but it's unbelievable. But the world believes it. So we've got the experts in it. Stop listening to experts. Listen to what's true. Andrea knows what's true. It's inside you. You already have the answer, Andrea. It's in you. You already have it.
And that really frees us up, doesn't it? Because like, if you follow that and you're following your truth, what feels right for you in that moment, then there is no failure, because the next step is the right step. Whether it's something that leads you to something that you'd rather not want, is still the right step. You know, who's to say that if that step didn't happen, then the 50th step down the line wouldn't happen as a result? You know, I look back at some of the, you know, real mess ups that I've made, you know, in my nearly 50 years on the planet. And I think, yeah, but if I hadn't done that, then that wouldn't have happened. And then that wouldn't have happened. And then it had to happen. It had to be that way. You know, I mean, I just shared today one of the ones that you know, on my Facebook page about the fact that I screwed up my A levels and didn't do very well in my exams. And, you know, but then I found a job that I just thought, actually, that feels right for me. You know, I'm not going to reset all my exams. I'm just going to go for this job. I walked in, and then there in front of me was a guy a couple of years older than me that happened to be going to be my husband. We've been married nearly 30 years. So it's like, if I hadn't have done that, if I hadn't have made that decision, if I hadn't have filled out that application form and decided to give up my education, that would never have happened. Didn't seem like a great move at the time, but it worked out okay.
That's the story. If we don't interfere psychologically by getting bummed out or have mental health issues or give into stress that leads to MS or cancer or all this other stuff, what happens is we start to see the reality, the truth of what we are. And the truth was, your husband was more important than your education.
Yeah. Well, and then my education came later. If I hadn't have met him, I wouldn't have gone to the bar. I wouldn't have trained as a lawyer. You know, I wouldn't have done any of that. I don't know. I might have done it, but I might have done it by a different route. Who knows? But that was, and what came to mind as well about when you were talking about decision making, you know, it reminded me of when I was giving up my legal career, and I would go through all the different computations of what was going to happen if I gave up. You know, the fact it always ended up with us being destitute and, you know, living in a ditch, and my kids would be, you know, starving and all of that. But I knew in my heart I had to stop. I knew that was the right decision for me. I knew that it was all going to be okay. I knew that, and it took me a year to make that decision.
Yeah, and in the end, decisions are just pathways, portals to the future, and whichever one you make is going to lead to the right thing. Once in the sweat lodge, this person asked the pourer of the water and said, which job should I take, this one or this one? You know, it's just kind of a specific non-purpose of the sweat type of question. And he answered very beautifully. He says, whichever one you decide on, the Spirit will be there to support you.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And that's the truth. You made your decision, you chose your pathway, and the Spirit is there to help you. And that takes the sting out of it, because all of a sudden it's going to work out. You know, Sid wrote a book called Second Chance. I got news for everybody. Every second of every moment of your life is a second chance.
That's lovely.
Yeah. So there's no right and wrong decision. There are decisions that you make because you're naive and so on. But if you're naive, it's good to make bad decisions so you become less naive.
Yeah.
You know, and you might say, oh, I feel like a failure. It's not a failure. It's just a perception of the moment. There's no failure. You know, I failed 1,000 times. Sometimes I felt it. Sometimes I laughed at it. Now I kind of, you know, see it more from neutrality. Yeah, you know, I'm not perfect. I have lightness and darkness in me. but I can hear the call of the jungle.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And I love the idea that no matter what decision we make, whatever step we take, of course, I mean, it makes sense as often it does when you have that insight. It's just obvious, isn't it? But we always have that universal mind within us there to help us. Just because we make a wrong decision, it doesn't kind of just switch it off and say, no, I'm not going to support you because you didn't go the right way. It's going to be working there in the background.
Yeah, but here's also an interesting aspect of decision. With what I'm talking about, you'll hear when windows of opportunity appear. And I got news for you, and every businessman knows that. Those windows close quickly. And you better go through those windows of opportunity and take them. And when you have what Andrea is suggesting, then what happens is your mind is empty enough, not cluttered full of stuff, that you can see those windows of opportunity. And that's these business people who can jump on a window of opportunity. They're spiritually gifted. They're gifted in a beautiful way, because they've learned that those windows of opportunity lead to a great expanse of either profit or business opportunity, or even personal dreams and wishes. But to accept windows of opportunity, you have to hear it. Another word for windows of opportunity is niches. You see niches, things that other people, it's easier to compete in areas that not everybody is in. That's just a fact of life. These big corporations are going to drown you out anyway. So, but to find niches or avenues that are of self-expression, that are windows of opportunity, those answering of those types of things will open you up to not only to profit, but they'll open you up to a feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction. That's what you want with your decision. Oh, that felt good. Oh man, I'm really proud of myself that I was able to walk through that and create this unusual project that turned into a success. So your freedom of not being cluttered up in your intellect, it's going to make you a lot more money, because you hear it. Or it will keep you away from things that you don't personally want to do. Maybe one of the biggest problems is, I can make a lot of money here, but I don't like it. Well, my advice is keep away from it. You find what you like, what drives you, what interests you. Andrea is doing what she's doing right now because she wants to hear the bells sing. Da, 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 da. Yeah, Andrea, that's very cool. And Andrea's going, yeah, I can hear you, bells. So I lived my life all wrong, but it worked out. Because I was listening to that first insight I had on Salt Spring Island. We're all one. I can't tell you what that means. I can't describe it to you. I can pretend to describe it. I can get a feeling of it. But I can tell you that personal spiritual experience, insight, was a spiritual awakening. And it changed my life, pointed me in the right direction. And that direction, when I was lost all through those years of going up and down, and interpreting that, never got lost. And it always came back to, I care. I care if people are suffering. I care if I can help somewhere with a piece of bread, a piece of money, a piece of this, I give. And that's what makes me feel good. I'm not interested in beating people in competition, although I was a champion in it. I'm not interested in that anymore. I'm just interested in us having a good time.
Yeah.
And performing at a level, I'm talking about tennis now, that I feel I'm doing I'm flying through the air. Even at my age, I can still fly through the air. Until my son hits one past me and I go, oh, not as fast as I used.
I love that. I love it. Harry, thank you so much for sharing all your insights today. It's just been lovely and such a joy to talk to you. It really has. And just thank you for being so open and sharing. And if anybody wants to contact you or get in contact, I'll put all the details of your website and that on the podcast details. So they will see that, they'll be there on the write-up. But yeah, just thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Really, really has. Thank you.
My pleasure. And remember, Andrea, it's because you're here, we went together. That's why it was. It's if it was a different person, it wouldn't be the same flying, the same feelings, the same. So you bring a beautiful light feeling of flying through the air in a business environment, which is of course highly needed. And guys, have a good time while you're making money. That's what I'm going to tell you.
I think that's a brilliant place to stop, isn't it? Well, after all, why else are we here unless we're going to have a good time? Thank you so much. Thank you.